Concubine culture is not a non-familiar term for us. We know that ancient religions and cultures vividly report that the emperors and rulers had concubines alongside their legal wives. They were kept for two purposes. One was to prove male supremacy and grace by producing children, and the second one was to get the limitless opportunities of sexual intimacy to fulfill their desires. In ancient literature, concubines were associated with the Chinese dynasty because that's the place where the concubine culture started. However, let me reveal to you that concubine culture is not exclusively limited to China. It is present in many other parts of the world too. Concubines were kept in Mesopotamia and Babylonia thousands of years ago as slaves. The real wife held the space of primacy, and the concubines were just to fulfill the sexual needs of men. They were never allowed to marry. Also, in Mesopotamia culture, the concubines were called prostitutes who were not respected but could perform religious duties. Concubines in China were part of a huge complex culture where their ranking was decided by the level of favor with the king or emperor. Some of them were considered pseudo-wives. However, those with lower status were called prostitutes. There were honorable consorts, honorable ladies, and imperial honorable consorts followed by the responders. Besides, the level of intimacy with the king could only decide the rank. The concubines rose to the highest rank by producing a son for the king, although the social status of that illegitimate son was lower than the original or legal son of the wife of the king. The status also rose if the concubine became successful in luring the king with her attributes or looks. Like there was consort Wu, who became the apple of the eye of the Chinese emperor Xuanzang because of her beauty. When the emperor's real wife died, the consort was raised to the status of empress. All concubines were not so lucky to achieve a higher status. Only those who gave sons to the king had a pleasant life, but life was not good for those who failed to have children. The Chinese emperors confined the concubines to a forbidden city where 20,000 of them lived in one space. They were guided by eunuchs, the castrated men, to ensure that they could only become pregnant by the king. Have you ever thought about where they came from? Let me reveal that the concubines were taken by force or sold to the emperor. The poor families presented their daughters to the rulers to be selected as their concubines. As a return gift, they got money or grains to eat. Moreover, this helped them to get rid of an extra mouth to feed and give the daughter a comfortable life and protection. Life inside the forbidden city was difficult for the concubine. The internal hierarchy was inflexible, and they were guarded by the castrated men all the time. Though they were kept for pleasure, there was no sort of pleasure in their life. The concubines were jealous of each other because spending a night with the emperor was considered a charm for them. They waited for a long to go to sleep with the emperor because a number of concubines were available to compete with each other. They were not able to communicate with the world outside. When any of them got ill, they were not allowed to consult a doctor. Their condition was told to the doctor, and prescriptions were administered inside the forbidden city. The concubine could leave the restricted city in some situations. If an emperor gifted her to another ruler, she was allowed to leave the place. Moreover, some of them were presented in front of the rulers to choose the one they wanted. If a concubine refused to go with the ruler, she was imprisoned for a definite period. The service of concubines was limited to 5 years. After that, they were returned to their homes with pensions. Freed concubines were allowed to continue their own life, marry, and produce children, but it is only allowed in the Hongwu Emperor 1389. Old concubines were employed as maids or nuns in the imperial palace. The glamorous yet dark past of the concubine culture was that they were considered the personal property of the rulers. He used to believe that the concubines with whom he was pleased would go with him to the afterlife, so whenever an emperor died, the concubines were buried along with him. In many older tombs, it can be seen that several females of lower age were buried close to the emperor, which is a strong indication of concubine culture practices. But how were the concubines murdered? Are they buried alive or first killed and then buried with the king? The sad truth is that they were forced to commit suicide by hanging themselves with a silk cloth and dying by taking poison. Otherwise, they were executed inside the palace. During the Ming Dynasty, the concubines were buried in a separate tomb near the emperor after immolation. In some cases, they were buried alive in a standing position to depict that they were awaiting the arrival of the king in the next life. The height of cruelty was reached, wasn't? Though the concubines were given a luxurious life, sometimes their lives turned worse than hell. During the Yongle Emperor, a rumor was spread in the Forbidden City that one of the emperor's favorite concubines committed suicide because she had an affair with the eunuch because of the emperor's importance. At first, the emperor didn't take notice of it, but when the news spread like a forest fire, she ordered the slaughter of all the women present there. He told the public that the concubine who did the sin was poisoned, but silently ordered the murder of 2,800 women in the harem by slicing. So many of them were brutally slaughtered and killed. 12-year-old concubines were put to death. No official records hold the tale of that massacre, but the surviving concubines told that story later. One of the beloved concubines of Yongle King, named Lady Kui, was away from the palace at that time. Shortly after, Lady Kui was 15 years old and the king died. On that day, Kui and the emperor's remaining concubines were hung from the white silk nooses in the halls of the Forbidden City. A rare obsession has also been reported in history. The 10th Ming ruler, named Zhengdi, was tired of his culture, so he used to slip out at night and spend time at the local brothels. However, he started bringing concubines. Their numbers grew so high that most of them starved to death as there was not enough food and room for them inside the Forbidden City. His successor, Jia Jing, tried to find the recipe for the elixir so that he could live forever. He believed that the key ingredient to this is the menstrual blood of the virgins. He ordered thousands of girls in the Forbidden City to be harvested. He made it sure that their bodies were pure, so they were kept away from men, and their diets were restricted to dew and mulberry. Many of them starved because this food was not enough to provide them with what their bodies required. The concubine culture continued till 1540s, but after that, the women realized that they should be free of these so-called emperor's possessions, so a group of 16 concubines fought back against the emperor for their freedom. This act is remembered as the Renyan plot in history. Some concubines planned it together and took action on the night when the emperor was in the room with his favorite consort, Duan. After she withdrew the attendants, the emperor was left alone, and the palace concubines took the chance to attack. One of them held down the emperor, while one concubine tried to strangle him with a ribbon from her hair. However, they failed to do so. Then, they took a silk curtain cord and tied it around his neck, but unfortunately tied the wrong kind of knot and were not able to tighten the noose to finish the job. One of the collaborators lost her nerves and conveyed the murder attempt to Empress Fang. As the emperor was unconscious till the next afternoon, the empress took matters into her own hand, and disastrously all the concubines involved in the matter were killed with slow slicing, which is also known as the death with 1,000 cuts on the body. Their plan failed, and they lost their lives too. Not only this, the emperor ordered a murder of the families of the concubines too. The life of concubines was not worth living. Imagine being someone's personal property and falling into a trap to satisfy his sexual needs. This is nothing else than humiliation, an act of brutality inflicted upon poor women of ancient China.